Have you ever said yes to something, even though every part of you wanted to say no? And the moment the conversation ended, you felt that quiet regret. If that happens to you often, there may be a deeper psychological reason why. Many people who struggle to say no live with a quiet inner conflict. From the outside, they look dependable. They're the ones who help when someone asks for a favor, the ones who agree to stay a little longer, do a little more, give a little extra. People often describe them as kind, supportive, easy to work with. But inside, the experience can feel very different. Because every yes sometimes comes with a silent thought. I actually didn't want to do that. And after the moment passes, the mind begins replaying the conversation. Why did I say yes again? Why is this so hard for me? Why do other people seem able to say no so easily? If you've ever asked yourself these questions, you might have wondered if something about you needs to change. Maybe you've told yourself you just need stronger boundaries, or that you need to stop being such a people pleaser. But what if this behavior didn't start as weakness? What if your brain simply learned that keeping people happy was the safest option? And once that pattern forms, it can follow you for years, often without you even realizing it. To understand why this happens, we need to look at what psychology says about the deeper need your brain is trying to protect. Psychologists often describe this pattern as approval-seeking behavior or conflict avoidance. But behind those technical terms is something very human. At a basic level, your brain is always trying to answer one quiet question. Am I safe with the people around me? For some people, safety comes from independence. They feel comfortable expressing disagreement or setting limits. But for others, safety comes from harmony. If your brain learned early in life that keeping people happy reduces tension, anger, or rejection, it begins building a powerful shortcut. Agree first. Avoid friction. Protect the relationship. Over time, this response becomes automatic. You're no longer consciously deciding whether you want to say yes. Your brain simply reacts in the fastest way it knows to maintain connection. And neuroscience shows something fascinating. The brain processes social rejection in many of the same regions that process physical pain. In other words, being rejected or disappointing someone doesn't just feel uncomfortable. To your brain, it can feel like a real threat. So when someone asks you for something, your mind quickly calculates the safest response. And very often, the safest response becomes yes. But here's where it gets interesting. Because this pattern isn't only about avoiding discomfort, it also reveals something important about how your mind is wired. And that's what we'll explore next. To really understand why saying no can feel so difficult, it helps to look at a few psychological patterns that often work together beneath the surface. And the first one begins much earlier than most people realize. The first pattern is conflict avoidance conditioning. If someone grew up in an environment where disagreement created tension, anger, or emotional distance, the brain learns something very quickly. Conflict feels unsafe. Maybe a parent reacted strongly to disagreement. Maybe arguments in the household felt overwhelming. Or maybe keeping the peace simply felt easier than expressing your own needs. Over time, the brain develops a simple rule. Agreement keeps things calm. So instead of pushing back, your mind chooses the option that protects harmony. Saying yes becomes a way to keep the emotional atmosphere stable. But here's the interesting part. The same sensitivity that makes you avoid conflict also means you are often very aware of emotional shifts around you. You notice tone, tension, and mood changes quickly. In other words, what looks like weakness from the outside is often actually a form of heightened emotional awareness. And that awareness can be a powerful strength. But there's another layer to this. The second pattern is what psychologists call the approval-reward loop. Our brains are wired to respond strongly to social signals. A smile, a thank you, a moment when someone says, "I really appreciate you." Each of these small interactions releases tiny amounts of dopamine in the brain, the same chemical involved in reward and motivation. For someone who often says yes, These moments quietly reinforce the behavior. Your brain begins associating helping others with positive emotional feedback. So when someone asks you for something, your mind quickly predicts two possible outcomes. If you say yes, you'll likely receive appreciation. If you say no, the response becomes uncertain. And humans naturally gravitate toward the option that feels more predictable. But here's where this pattern also reveals a hidden strength. People who operate this way often become incredibly supportive friends, partners, and colleagues. They create environments where others feel cared for and understood. And that's not something everyone can do naturally. Still, there's another factor that makes saying no even harder. The third pattern involves identity. At some point in life, many people receive a label from others. You're the reliable one. You're the person everyone can count on. You're always so helpful. At first, that recognition feels good. It becomes part of how people see you. But over time, it can quietly turn into an expectation. If you say no, are you still that reliable person? So your brain tries to protect the identity that others depend on. And that's why saying no can sometimes feel like you're disappointing not just the person asking, but the image people have of you. But the truth is, the same trait that makes you feel this pressure is also the reason people trust you so deeply. And finally, there's one more layer that ties everything together. The fourth pattern is empathy overload. Many people who struggle to say no have a strong ability to imagine how others might feel. So when someone asks for help, your mind doesn't just hear the request. It instantly simulates the emotional outcome. You can almost picture their disappointment if you refuse. You can imagine the awkward moment, the silence, the subtle shift in their tone. And that emotional simulation makes it much harder to decline. But the ability to feel and understand other people's emotional world so clearly is also the foundation of emotional intelligence. It's what allows you to build deep, meaningful connections with others. So while these patterns can make saying no feel complicated, they also reveal something important about the way your mind works. And in a moment, we'll pause to look at something surprising that most people misunderstand about this trait. But here's the part most people misunderstand. The advice you usually hear is simple. Just set boundaries. Just learn to say no. But if your brain has spent years linking disagreement with emotional risk, it's not something you can switch off overnight. Your mind isn't being stubborn. It's trying to protect connection. And real change rarely begins with forcing yourself to act differently. It begins with understanding why your brain chose this strategy in the first place. Because once you see the pattern clearly, something interesting starts to happen, and the story begins to shift. For a long time, society has used certain labels for people who struggle to say no. People pleaser, too nice, too passive. And after hearing those labels enough times, it's easy to start believing that something about you is weak. But psychology often sees the same behavior in a very different way. Many of the traits behind this pattern are actually signs of a highly relationship-aware mind. You notice how your actions affect others. You value harmony. You instinctively consider people's feelings before your own. Those qualities are not flaws. In fact, they are the foundation of empathy, cooperation, and trust. They are the same traits that make someone a supportive friend, a thoughtful partner, or the person others feel safe opening up to. The real issue isn't kindness. The real issue is when kindness only flows in one direction. When your empathy extends to everyone else, but rarely includes yourself. Healthy boundaries aren't about becoming cold or selfish. They are about balance. Instead of asking, how do I stop caring about others? A better question might be, how do I include myself among the people I care about? Because when your needs are respected too, your kindness stops feeling exhausting and starts becoming sustainable. And that realization often leads to one very important emotional shift. If you've struggled with saying no for most of your life, there's something important to remember. You're not weak, and you're not broken. Your mind simply learned that protecting relationships was the safest way to move through the world. For a long time, that strategy may have helped you avoid conflict, keep the peace, and stay connected to the people around you. But growing emotionally doesn't mean abandoning that kindness. It means expanding it. It means allowing the same care and understanding you offer to others to include yourself as well. Because respecting your own limits isn't rejection, it's honesty. And the relationships that truly value you rarely fall apart when you start being honest about your needs. In fact, many of them grow stronger. And that's where a healthier kind of connection begins. If this video resonated with you, you might be someone who cares deeply about people and the invisible emotions beneath everyday conversations. And this channel is a space for minds like that. So if you enjoy exploring the quiet psychology behind human behavior, consider subscribing. And I'm curious to hear from you. What situation makes it hardest for you to say no?